For assignment 2 in creative coding, I chose brief 2, which was that you're approached by a digital agency to create a prototype of a creative tool for their visual designers to create visually interesting textures that can be used as part of their design process. As part of that, we got to choose which industry we were creating for. So with a background in fashion design and textile design, I was really interested in creating something for surface designers. So to come up with my concept, I did a little bit of user research, which I'll show you in a second. But one of the issues I came across was that creating abstract patterns is quite tricky, or an abstract motif. So what I've created here is an image manipulation tool where you can use these slides to manipulate an image to make it just look quite wild. And I'll also give you a live demonstration of how the prototype works at the end. So these are some of the outputs that I created using my image glitch texture generator. And this is them superimposed over some objects to show what a surface designer could do with them. Now in this case, I've used the whole single image, but my idea is that you could also take this into a program like Photoshop, and you could then further cut it up, manipulate it to create a repeat pattern as well. So these were some of the design and aesthetic choices I made, and a little bit of research I did around that. So I looked at some tools that designers are currently using, things like Illustrator and Photoshop, and looked at the high level of, knowledge required to interact with it. Like, nothing is intuitive. And then I looked at something like Redbubble, where you don't really need any idea of how to manipulate a pattern at all to be able to create a pattern. But in that sense, you also lose your agency as well. So I did a little bit of prototyping. Also this was very early stage idea of what I was trying to think about creating. I was looking at using Perlin Noise as my output, which I ended up not going with. And I looked at trying to create a more intuitive system to use, where it felt more creative and that you're actually like adjusting dials rather than entering in exact inputs. And I also originally thought about having it in separate states that you progress through, but I ended up simplifying it right down to being a single state, just a single page workflow. So this is my approach to the design process. I always start with ideation. I looked at doing some brainstorming. I already knew that I wanted to work for a surface designer when I created my texture. So I had a think about what sort of things they create surfaces for, what sort of issues they might come across. I looked at things like different printing practices. And then from there, I started to ask some early questions around some clarifying questions to guide my further research on an idea that I thought I was going to go into, but didn't end up doing after doing a bit more user research. And so then this was my user research. I was lucky enough to have a friend who is a surface print designer. And so I interviewed her, and we talked about what some of her pain points were, what her design process is like, some of the technical considerations that I had to think about in designing this. So the first area I explored, I looked at creating maybe some sort of AI pattern confusion generator. I looked at what was already on the market, what they were already creating. Then I started thinking about more abstract print design, because this turned up as being more of an issue. While this was super exciting, I just ended up not being as interested in this idea, and instead wanted to look at more tackling a problem that surface designers were actually having. So I looked at current printing methods, and then I looked at how what I create could create an output for that. And so I ended up moving away from screen printing, just because of the limitation in the number of colors you can use, and instead of looking at dispersed dyes and digital prints. And then I also looked at some abstract prints that are quite popular at the moment. So I looked at Gorman, Pretty Parcel, just seeing what's trending, what's happening right now. But then it's also important to look at what's happening in the future. And I apologize here, I have redacted these images, but I did a trend analysis looking at WGSN, which is a global fashion forecaster, at what trends were coming up. And I was looking at almost a cyberpunk aesthetic, very dark, very glamorous, very opulent, and almost like computer glitched images. But I did redact those because I'm not sure what WGSN's policy was with sharing things like that. I know it's okay in schoolwork, but didn't want to go publishing their reports. So then back to my design process. So I started sketching out some minimum viable products and also a little bit of a stretch goal. So I didn't actually reach my stretch goal. My stretch goal was to try and make a seamless pattern repeat, but time ran out before submitting the assignment. So then I started looking at some early code examples. So I started with manipulating by creating a color picker, which didn't actually manipulate but selected colors. I learned how to make Perlin Noise. I started to apply Perlin Noise to the output image, but my images were coming out too pixelated, and then the other ones were coming out too dark. And then I realized that the darkness was actually the space between the pixels, and because I was using dark mode, which will be an issue again later. And then I was able to use like a color picker unsuccessfully, but then also a slider to increase and decrease the amount of distortion. And then here I changed the Perlin Noise colors. I still felt like it wasn't visually interesting enough. I mean, it didn't matter what you did at the end of the day, it still looked like smoke, which there's only so many interesting patterns you can create with smoke. So here is where I actually started to get a bit more interesting in the image I was creating. It's almost like it's crumpled up a bit, but what it's actually doing is like reorganizing the pixels. So then we also had to look at creative influences. So I was really inspired by Robbie Barrett, who works with AI to create things, and especially because they use a lot of their work in fashion, which is like crossover I'm really interested in. Clara Baku, who does a lot of AR work, and I felt like her work had that opulence that I was looking for. And then Samir Zaran, because their work was using like a lot of the Perlin Noise that I was interested in. Their work is in 3D, which I would love to do, but I'm so not there yet in my coding. So I still worked in 2D for my final output, but also is really drawn to their color palettes, which if you've seen my work in Assignment 1, you know I am a sucker for pastels. And then also Holly McQuillan and Genevieve Packer. I was really interested in their zero waste digital textile design. And so in this concept, they're printing their design directly onto the fabric so that when they cut it, the print is already in the exact same space it needs to be in, and so there's not as much textile waste. And my references. And so I will show you my actual live example and give you a bit more of an overview of that. So to give you a demo of my visual glitch motif generator, basically you just move the slides, which distorts the noise of the image on the right. The image on the left is your input image, so you can see what you are starting with, and so you can see what sort of distortions you've made. So this is the starting point. When you first load it, it automatically generates this image, and then you can simply move the sliders to change the levels of distortion that you're seeing. So some of the feedback that I got, which was really valuable, and this one's a little bit embarrassing, is that I should have made the background black, because what I totally forgot was that I'm working in dark mode in P5.js. And so if you don't have dark mode set, you won't actually see my text down here. So these bottom sliders down here, the red, green, and blue value, affect the red, green, and blue values in the image. So you can increase those to change the saturation of those colors, I guess you could say. Then here you're kind of adjusting the like distortion. I thought it looked like pixelation, so I called it that. Here you are moving your pixels horizontally. Here you're kind of moving them vertically. It's not really a true representation of what it's doing code-wise, but it's kind of how it looked visually, and I felt that because I was creating this for a visual design audience, that it was important to give my labels more of a design meaning than, say, a code meaning. And so another bit of feedback that I got is that implementing it further in the future would be really good to have an upload option so that people can upload their images to try and distort their images. For this early prototype, I did just put in an image from Unsplash, but it would be really great if people could put their own in and manipulate those as well. So thanks for watching.